All right, guys, today let's make some melodic trap melodies. This is the new melody series right here, busyworksbeats.com. All right, so let's hop into FL Studio. I'll guide you guys step by step. Today we're going to focus on melodic trap. Melodic trap basically introduces chords to trap. Usually trap music is just two chords, a minor chord and a suspended second chord. And that's pretty much what trap is for the most part. Or we're just moving in half steps, which is not musically like that creative. Okay, so what we're gonna do with melodic trap, sorry, y'all, choked on air, is let's create chords. Okay, so they could be seventh chords, ninth chords. Let's just record some chords in here and then I'll break down. Actually, let's just draw it in just to show you guys. So the first chord, I like to pivot around E and F because E and F are a half step away, but they're still the white notes, so it makes it easier to write chords and stuff. So basically E and F will give you the sound. That half step sound. Now from here, we have to decide which chord we're going to use. So there's many different ways to think about chords, and I'm trying not to overwhelm you guys with information, but I have a whole course on this that will guide you step by step. It's called Music Theory in a Day. Go to busyworksbeats.com/music theory in a day. I'll leave a link below. I could either look at this E as the top note of a chord. In that case, if I was making a seventh chord, it would be F major. If I don't like that sound, I could say, okay, maybe E is a raised third. So in this case, I would position this as if it were the third of a chord, which would be C, E, G, B. And then I would take these notes, pull them down an octave. That gives me a different sound. Or I could say E is the root note of this chord, and then we're going to create a chord extension from here. I like this tone, but okay, so E is also the top note here. So this works in this case because it's still E is the top note. So let's try this approach to it, which is we're just playing simple triads here, 3-note chords with the root note reinforced as the top note. Okay, so that gives us the solution in this case. And now we have this kind of trap, you know, it feels like Gucci Mane or Waka Flocka. It's because of this half step. So let's do that about 3 times, and then at the end, let's create a switch up. So the question is, what chord do we use here? So it goes dun, 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 dun. My ear wants to go boom. It's a C, because C is the 5th of F. I don't have, you know, a bunch of information to give you guys, but basically, this would be a dominant chord coming back to the tonic in this case. Okay, so the chord type here may be a major, it may be a minor, or maybe both. So we're going to use a specific chord type called a dominant ninth chord, and I'll show you guys how I would use this. Now, this is going to sound very jazz-like, but let's just hear what it sounds like first. So right now it sounds very bland. Let's take what's called the 5th and the 7th, raise this up a half step. So it sounds very cheesy coming back down. So let's pull this up an octave. So that at the end is just a cheesy way to end. So in this case, maybe C needs to be our top note. So we're going to have to do what's called revoicing here. And this is the trickier part of chords because you have to think in a very complex way. So we're just reshaping the way we perceive a chord. Now, some may say this is too musical. We could take out what's called the 7th. And then at the end, it sounds a little cheesy coming back down. So let's see if we add E in here. Okay, so what we're doing in between here without convoluting this whole video is let's count this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a major third, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is what's called an augmented chord. These 3. So I had to dumb down that 9th chord all the way down to a simple augmented chord. Not mandatory. We could also try suspended chords. Let's try that next. Okay, so I try suspended second and suspended fourth. It doesn't give the same vibe. It's weird how this F major sounds darker than the one at the end here. It's because this is the dark chord and then this becomes the bright chord. So this is interesting how the major chord sounds different from here to here. Okay, now let's just pick different sounds here. I'm using bells because these are easy to manipulate in terms of effects. We could use the shortcut Alt-A to articulate add an arpeggio to those notes. Let's keep going until we find the right sound for this vibe. I think we found our sound here. Okay, now let's go back to the chords and let's see if we can, one last thing, let's see if we can change this major chord to maybe a suspended chord. Just to make it a little bit darker. Right here, this is called chromaticism, going down note by note. So again, the ear won't catch that as much as us focusing on it right now. So let's add this to the harmony. And now we have that layer, or I won't call it a layer just yet, but that component taken care of. Let's add some more sounds. Let's try the SRX world. And let's just use some of these exotic sounds in here. Let's try either mallets or we could try guitar sounds. Okay, so here's a cool sound. All right, so what you guys could do if you want to do a cookie cutter approach is you could open up your piano roll and use these as templates to say you could stick with only these notes. Let's pull this up an octave. This is going to be a little tricky because I have to pull this up an octave. So let's copy the original chords over to pattern 2, paste it in, and then we're going to raise these up an octave, hit Control up. So the goal here is not to hear these chords, it's to use that as a guide. So let's right click, go to the piano roll. And now we can have these as ghost notes. So what I'll do to turn off the volume is go to the velocity, turn these all down to 0. So it shouldn't trigger any sound, but we can visually see them as ghost notes. And now we can hit Alt, left click to restore the velocity. Now, again, when you guys are playing by hand, you don't have to do all these steps. It's only when you click in notes do you have to do all this stuff. Okay, so what we're going to do is we can stick to this 4-note chord, which is E, G, B, and then E repeated. Or we can, add a 5th note in here, which is a fifth of a fifth. So you're going to take the root note, count up 7 notes. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That gives you the 5th. It's called the perfect 5th. And then count up 7 notes from here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this is an additional note you guys can add into your melody. So it gives you 5 notes to work with. So let's add this to our playlist here. And we could do this per chord, so I'm going to do the same exact thing here. We're just going to switch the chord type to a major, but it's the same formula going from the root note to the 5th to the 9th. So we can work in 3s. So I'm just going to do something like that. So your melodies don't need to be do 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 every single second. That's why I left a gap here. So we can copy this over. Now this chord is different, so let's see if I transpose these notes here. So we're really just following the chord. Now, if you want to get fancy, you could take what's called the third. So there's different thirds per chord. So in this first chord, that would be the note G in this case. Second chord would be the note A. And we can pull this up an octave to add a melodic, strong melodic note. So let's see where we can add those notes. I feel like the melody's so strong, there's no gaps to really add it in. But let's just try one thing here. Let's raise this third. Hit control up. Now the tone won't make sense because we're just jumping a whole octave. So it just won't make sense. But keep in mind, we can also use that raised third as a melodic kind of pivot point. I think the melody's good. So here's where I might think about adding effects. Let's go to our mixer here. Let's add different plugins. I really like the Transporter plugin, and we can mess with any kind of glitchy plugins. Let's see what we have here. Let's try Transporter. I think this melody moves too fast for this plugin. Let's try it one more time. Yeah, I feel like it's moving too fast, and when you have delay over top of everything, it just gets a little convoluted because the notes don't match. Okay, so what else can we add? We can add a contrast layer and a rhythm section. Now keep in mind that do 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 is a very rhythmic approach to a top line. So, you know, in theory, we have a rhythm and a top line. So all we have really left to add is a contrast layer. Let's see what kind of sounds we can find. Now I'm using Roland sounds because they're more rich in terms of quality. So let's see what else we can find in here. Let's do Analog Lab. I think I made a couple presets for you guys. So there's a free, I made a free pack for the Discord. It's 50 presets for Analog Lab. Just join us on Discord. It's discord.gg/BusyWorksBeats. I have some presets in here. So we went E and F. Okay, so now we can add this in. This like Reese type bass. Okay, so hopefully that recorded. So now we have our contrast layer, and the bass isn't overwhelming to where it just kind of eats up the entire composition. So your safest bet for these style melodies is a simple Reese bass, nothing too crazy, nothing too harmonically rich, because then it might be hard to write melodies around it. One more plugin to mess with is Gross Beat. Now again, this melody's moving kind of fast, so adding Gross Beat halftime might not work with this rhythm. Let's go to preset, momentary, half speed. But now that's that like Travis Scott type sound. Now for the brass, let's make it more Travis Scott-esque. Let's add Hyper Chorus. This is a great plugin. And what you guys can do is actually automate Gross Beat. So we can either automate the time or we can automate the mix level. So for this one, let's mess with the time. Let's right click, create an automation clip. So I could duplicate this, and without adding any sounds, I could basically turn it off, turn it on, and then turn it back off. So it turns into halftime over time. So I like that effect. We want to make sure we don't take away too much of the bell because that's the thing that grabs the ear. It's the pointy part of the sound. So over top of this, here's where we can add layers. So here's where I'm going to think about We could add rhythmic layers. I'm using my DX7 as far as the sound source here, and I'm running through what's called the microcosm. So we could use the microcosm. I'm just going to try to play melodically over this. And I'm thinking more of a rhythm than a strong melody. So I like that tone. The only thing is I have to decide if I want to run it through the pedal. So let's add this in. It's a little bit quirky, but okay, so it's like reverb delay. It's just a quirky plugin, or excuse me, a quirky guitar pedal effect. So it makes it less direct of a sound and more of a smeary sound. Can you guys look at the project file so don't worry about memorizing everything? Let's go back to our bass. Let's just try some different presets. I feel like this one has a little more attitude that we need. And let's pull back on some of this gross beat so that it doesn't completely take out the pointiness of the audio. And let's try a different bell sound. So I like this sound, and I also found one of the sounds in there called like spokes or something. We can layer this. So that would be what I call a top line expression layer. Anytime I add a sound that isn't really a melodic tone, but it's just there to reinforce the melodic tone, I call that what's called an expression layer. What I call an expression layer. So let's open up the categories, and it's called spokes on this one. So I don't want this to play ding, 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 ding. It would be too much. So let's send this to a new mixer insert, and I just want this to hit on the downbeats so we can get rid of every note here. I just want this to play every bar. So let's do this. Cut these out. So I'm hitting Control Shift to get rid of those, to highlight the notes. So this is more of an accent. Some people call it accents. So I'm going to add this in. To me, this is what I call a top line expression. It's a high frequency that isn't a melody, but it's there to reinforce the melody. And this is what I call layering. So when people ask me how to layer, it still comes back to this four component system. So you have the harmony expression, you have top line expression, contrast expression, and rhythm expression. So it's anytime you exaggerate something. So that could be a bass slide, it could be chord pitch bending, impact sounds. Let's just turn this sound down. Again, the goal of the sound is to make the sound more pointy. Even with just this, the melody is pretty fire. So what we're going to do to kind of teach you guys how to make this even bigger, let's take something out of the arrangement on the right side here. Let's take out the harmony section. Or you know what, the contrast, we don't want that to be super repetitive, so let's take out the bass. And now we can either redo the bass, change the notes, or change the sound completely. Or we can do those exaggerative things, which is called the contrast expression. So now I'm either going to change the bass sound or play a different bass line. So here's where an 808 might go. Because we're not making a beat, you know, this is where we can let the producer add their own 808. If I were to add an 808, it'd be a very distorted 808. Let's go to Blueprint at busyworksbeats.com/blueprint. We have a ton of 808s in here. Let's see which one fits this vibe. Probably this one here. I'm going to distort it in some way, so let's just record. Try not to make a whole beat, but I do think an 808 would be the proper contrast here. So let's find the root note. So we use a higher octave just so we can hear it. Kind of like the octave of the bass. It's not interfering with too many bass notes. Let's just quantize this. Let's hit Alt Q. Sometimes my Alt Q quantize hasn't been quantizing properly. So worst case, hit Control Q. Let's hear what this would sound like down an octave. But we got to be careful as sound designers not to produce for the producer because it takes away the whole point. I do like the sound though. Debating if I want to distort the sound. Let's run it through Fruity Wave Shaper just to see if a distorted sound would sound good on this sound. It does add more knock to the sound. Let's run this all the way back. Let's see what else we can add in here. I'm thinking we could do more harmony expression layers. I might even add my Korg in here. But let's see what else we can find in here. I feel like at this point in the song, the top line becomes a little repetitive, so let's take out the top line. Okay, so now we have room for a top line, which this is a top line. Remember, guys, this is the top line expression layer. So this is kind of holding the weight of the top line. And I forgot what this is here. So this is an additional top line expression layer. So this is when people ask me about layering. Once it comes down to the 4 components, and this is why I teach you 4 components, because now you guys know what your song is actually missing. I might turn that bass down and just do a respace instead. Yeah, let's mute Let's mute this 808, only because I don't want it to turn into a beat. Let's just change up the bass. Let's do something as simple as that. Let's record this in. Okay, so just kind of freestyling that. Okay, so we need that contrast layer. Let's keep. So we could reinforce this with a little more harmony, a little more chord activity, maybe some sawtooth, something a little bit brighter harmonically. Let's see what else we can find in here. Let's try a different category. Let's try there. See if there's any brass in here. I'm not sure there is on this plugin. Let's try some. We could do Latin. It's a little cheesy sounding. Let's layer this. So we have this tuba, and then we could do. So basically, I'm playing the same chords. Just adding that underneath. All right, so now we have that layer. Now let's add the other trumpet. I think we need one more like moving top line thing, like a super aggressive weird sound. So we're using that as an aggressive high frequency sound that just kind of moves throughout the track. So in this case, I would call this another top line expression layer. Let's turn it down a little bit. Now we can rearrange those puzzle pieces. So now I'm just going to go through my keyboard to try to find just little sounds to add over top. So as you guys can see, we're just adding little like stuff around the corners of the melody. We could be here all day adding sounds. So for this section where I add the ninth chords, let's see what happens if I take out the chord layers, the harmony. Should become a little more majestic sounding. So I'm debating if I want those horns to come in because it takes away some of the ninth's attention. Let's play this melody one more time. All right, so it all comes down to that 4-component system that I taught you guys. And if you want the full video on how that system works, search up 8 bars into full song BusyWorks beats. It'll guide you through an entire arrangement system that I have. So that is how we created a melodic trap melody that was very diverse in sound. All right, guys, if you want these project files for free, just go to busyworksbeats.com, sign up for free, click where it says free downloads at the top, and share this video with a friend. Peace.